Welcome to Resume Workshop 1, Building Your Resume from Scratch. I'm Stephanie Hessler. I'm a career community advisor at Career Education at Wellesley, and this webinar is perfect for you if you're in the early stages of building your resume. Regardless of your academic or your career interests, this is a workshop, a webinar that's going to cover the basics of writing a resume. Our objective today is to support you in understanding why we use resumes and what its key components are. We also want to support you in building your resume from scratch. So during this workshop and webinar, we're going to give you tools to build your resume. And we want to encourage you to take time after this webinar to actually do the exercises. This will give you the opportunity to build your resume. Now, a recording of this webinar will be available, so if you want to go back to listen to it, that will be available to you. So how are we using our time today? So we have about 30 minutes, and first we're going to review the purpose of a resume. Next, we're going to talk about some of the basic components of a resume, as well as the essential components of a strong competitive resume. Then we're going to share some tools for brainstorming your experiences. You're going to need to do this in order to build the content for your resume. Next, we'll show you how to write effective bullets. We recommend using a bullet format, and writing effective bullets really highlights your accomplishments and helps you to have a strong competitive resume. So all of this is designed to equip you to build your resume. So let's jump in. Now, what purpose does your resume serve? First of all, it's important that at the level of a college student, your resume is one page. And it's to help you get an interview for an internship or a summer job. And as I said, at the college level, it's important that it stays one page. I know sometimes it's tempting to have more than one page, but recruiters expect a one-page resume at the level of college students. Now, your resume clearly presents and summarizes your current and past experiences. So this includes education, your skills, and your accomplishments. It's also important that it's easy for your reader to understand your unique value. So what is it that you bring? Why should they be interviewing you? And I want to stress here that as you're building your resume, think about your reader, right? Put yourself in the seat of your reader. And is it easy for them to understand what it is that you bring? Something else is that your resume is the first opportunity you have to make an impression. So people look at resumes surprisingly quickly. I've heard estimates of 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. So that's not very much time. People look at resumes and draw conclusions from that first impression. So it's important to have a professional, clean, and consistent look. And the format that we're sharing with you today is for a very sort of traditional resume. There are certain industries, some of the arts, which allow you to be a little more creative in your resume. But what we're doing here is showing you a real kind of classic, traditional college level resume. So what other purposes does a resume serve? Well, it's a tool to market yourself. It's like a calling card. It's a way to get your foot in the door, to get an interview. Now, it's also used during an interview. So your interviewer may be holding a copy of your resume, right? So whether you're looking for an internship for a summer or a full-time job, or you're sitting in an interview, this document is a tool with which you market yourself. It's like a calling card. Now, it's also really a living document, and it's going to continue to evolve. So by living document, we mean that you're going to be using a resume throughout your career. So it's important to think in terms of keeping it up to date. And lastly, we want to point out that a resume is not a list of everything you've ever done. Remember how important it is at the level of a college student to keep it to one page. And you also want to keep it relevant to the types of positions and organizations that you're applying to. So all of this information that we're sharing with you today is to help you to build a strong, competitive resume that really captures who you are, captures your potential to a future employer, and helps you to stand out. So let's talk a little bit now about some resume basics. So at its most basic level, there are 4 key areas: the header, the education section, the experience section, and skills. So you can think in terms of at the most basic level, these are the kind of key areas of the one-page resume, okay? Now let's also think in terms of format, so how it actually looks, its appearance, and content, its information. So let's start with the header. So the header is at the very top, and I'll show you an example in a minute. And this is your name and your contact information. Contact information is very important because we want the recruiter or the person you're contacting to be able to get in touch with you. Education for college students goes at the top of your resume underneath the header because that's part of your most recent experience. The experience section is usually the largest section. And sometimes this is broken down into different components. So for example, work experience or leadership experience, or you can choose to keep it in one kind of major bucket like just experience. And then lastly, and it's a very small section at the bottom, which is called skills. Now, in terms of format, so the appearance, how it looks, it's important to have easy to read font. We recommend a reverse chronological order. So we want to go from our oldest experiences to our most recent experiences. We also recommend bullet points, using bullet points in the experience and other sections, because these are really easy for the reader's eyes to follow. It's important for your resume to be visually balanced, so from top to bottom and from left to right. Take a consistent approach, and remember, you want to keep it to one page. And in the beginning, this can be challenging. We have a checklist with some of these key formatting items, and I will be sure to show you how you can access that before we end the webinar. Now, in terms of content, content is the information about you. So in the header section, for example, that's your name and your contact information. But as we go into education experience, we're going to have a lot more substance there. That's the important information that tells your reader who you are and why you are a person of great potential who they want to interview. It's very important in content to have correct grammar and spelling, so be sure you're proofreading. We want to encourage you to use action verbs, and we'll show you a reference that we have where you can find action verbs. And we want to encourage you here, don't play small. Don't undersell your accomplishments. And so this will require some introspection, right? But be sure that you're really highlighting your accomplishments and what your capabilities are. So what I want to do now is take a minute and take you to the career education website and actually walk you through a little bit of an example so that you can start to see the formatting and the content and some of these resume basics. So we'll jump in there, and we're going into a section of the Wellesley Career Education website, which is called Navigating the Job Search. And there are about 24 different articles that you can look up there. And the one that I'm jumping to is called Resume Guidelines and Samples. And there are 4 sample resumes. And we're going to jump into the one that's called Sienna. And we're actually going to be referencing this one a couple of times throughout this webinar. So what I want to do right now is just take you on a quick little tour of of the resume, so to speak. And I'd like to use real estate metaphors when I speak about resumes, because we kind of have limited terrain, if you think about it, on a one-page resume. Okay, so we have to be really concise with our formatting and our content. So here at the top is the header. And you'll notice that the font is a little bit bigger for the name than it is for some of the other sections. Then we've got the second section of the 4 basics is education. Next, we're in experience. Now, Sienna has chosen to call it leadership and experience. She could have broken it out into work experience and have another section called leadership experience, but she's calling it leadership and experience. So you can be creative here, but you want to have primarily a leadership section. This is going to be one of the larger sections of your resume. And then the last part at the bottom is skills. And she's choosing to also add interests, which of course is optional. So those are the 4 areas, right? We've got the header, education, experience, and then skills. And you see how it all fits onto one page. Now let's take a minute to look at this from a formatting perspective. In other words, how it actually looks. So we've got a top margin, we've got a bottom margin. Okay, we've got a left margin and a right margin. And all of this information in terms of what we recommend is available to you on the checklist that I'll point out to you later. Now, this resume happens to be separated with kind of linear demarcations. We encourage you to look at the different examples of resumes that we have so that you can decide for yourself what's kind of the best format that works for you. Now, remember how I said in terms of formatting, we also want it visually balanced left to right. So what helps it to be balanced is that we put the dates on the right. You know, if we had the dates here, everything on the left, this resume would be heavily skewed towards the left. So visually, what this does is it helps to balance it out. And then as you can see, we've got these bullet points. So this is the bullet point format that we recommend. And you'll see how the organization names and the locations are in bold, then the positions are in italics. So varying the appearance of the font also just is visually appealing and makes it easier to read. So that's a quick overview of some of the basics of a resume. And let's keep going with our presentation. So, what are the essential components now that we're going deeper into the content of your resume? We just looked at the formatting, right? And when you think about the essential components and the contents, in other words, the substance, like I said, we looked primarily at the format, how it looks, right? Making sure it's visually balanced. But now we've got to ask, what does your reader need to know about you? And what do you want your reader to know about you, right? So we're going deeper into the substance, the content, the information. We're going deeper into understanding what it is about you that you want to highlight in your resume. So as we think about the content, the actual information in the different sections of your resume, here's something that can help guide you. So I've left out the header section because that's pretty obvious, right? That's your name and your contact information. And in today's world, more and more, the most important thing is your cell phone number and your email address, because less is done through postal mail. So the most important thing is you've got your name, your email address, and your cell phone number. And then the 3 remaining basic sections are education, experience, and skills. And when we look at each of these 3 buckets, those key components are in your education, so you're a Wellesley College, right? Your degree is a Bachelor of Arts. You can, if you've decided on a major, you put your major in. If you've got a minor, you put that in. Now, things like study abroad, cross-registration, relevant coursework, and by relevant coursework, we mean relevant to the position that you're applying to, not a list of every course you've taken in your major. and then academic awards and honors. And these all go under your education section as bullets. Now, you may only have one bullet that goes under your education. You may not have decided to put any bullets under your education, but you must have your degree and your major and your minor. Now, some industries, like the ones that I represent, which are finance and consulting, expect you also to add your GPA. So that's where it's important for you to talk to your community career advisor to find out whether you need to add your GPA to your resume. Now, the second bucket, experience, like I've mentioned, this is the biggest component of your resume. And your experience covers your work history, your leadership, extracurricular and clubs, might be research or volunteer and service work that you've done, or academic work, academic projects, and athletic teams or clubs that you've been involved in. So these are all the different components that can contribute to experience. And then lastly, that skills section, which goes at the very bottom of your resume, and it's typically just one or two lines, but this covers skills like computer or software skills, languages, or, for example, certifications. So, how do you start? And how do you decide what the content of your resume is going to be? In the beginning, it can just feel really overwhelming, right? You've got all this stuff in your life, and how do you pack it all into one page? Well, we encourage you to take the time to brainstorm your experiences. So this is a very preliminary step. Get a notepad or create a computer document for this. You don't have to worry about keeping this to one page. You can have this be as many pages as you want. Use this as a type of worksheet. And we'll start with work history. Okay, so you see the word here, work history, excuse me. So write down and brainstorm your work history. Think of every job, internship, name of the organizations, your title, and write them all down. For each one of those, write down the dates and the location. For each one of those, write not only what you did in terms of your responsibilities, but more importantly, your accomplishments, your actual results, if you helped to solve problems, what contribution you made, what impact. And, you know, you'd be amazed, even if it feels like your job was not terribly, quote unquote, important, there's always importance to what we've done. And this is where the nuggets are for you to dig in and really be able to express the accomplishment, the contribution, the impact. And then think about also the skills that you used or developed in each of these positions. And then think about what sets you apart, right? So this is a process that involves quite a bit of introspection. Now, you can also look up the job descriptions if you're able to find those. That can be helpful, but we want to be sure that you're not repeating the job description in your resume, right? That is just helping you to think about some of these questions. Now, for first years, it's okay to include high school, but after sophomore year, you want to focus more on your college experiences and remove the high school items and those older items. We really want to focus on your high school experiences. So the next step in this brainstorming process is to the same exercise for education, right? So create a worksheet for schools that you've attended, right? So if you've been cross-registered at MIT or you've done a study abroad, these will all go on your worksheet as schools. And write the dates that you've attended, the locations, any relevant courses, and again, relevant to the types of jobs that you're applying to. You don't want to make this a list of every course you've ever taken, right? And list out also any honors or awards that you've had. And for college, you want to have an expected graduation date. And for anything that has been part of your Wellesley education, for example, if you did a study abroad through Wellesley, or you were cross-registered at Babson or MIT, those really are bullets under your Wellesley education, right? But at this point, we are just simply brainstorming your experiences. And you could also add here test scores and GPA, just so you have access to those. As I said, some industries do expect students to post those on their resumes. So next, we want to continue this exercise and look at your leadership and activities. So these are your extracurricular, your clubs, organizations. This is research, volunteer and service work, academic projects you may have been involved with, significant projects that in classes, and then athletic teams and clubs. So we want to encourage you to take a similar approach here as you're brainstorming, as you're doing this preliminary work, to similar thought process to how you approached your work history. So think in terms of not just what you did or what position you had at a club or on a team, but actually in terms of your accomplishments, results, contribution, impact, problems that you may have helped solve. What set you apart? Be careful, as I mentioned earlier, not to undersell yourself. And whenever possible, as you're doing this brainstorming process, whether you're looking at your experiences or your leadership and activities, quantify your results whenever you can. So for example, if as part of being on an athletic team, you helped raise $500 through sales of t-shirts for travel expenses, be sure that you put that number $500 in, right? Or if you were involved in something that helped drive membership by 20%, be sure that you've put that 20% in. Having things quantified is very, very important because it just shows results and it makes it easier for the reader to see that you're results oriented. So these types of brainstorming is going to help you to gather all the information that you need to build a really strong resume. Now, the last section is writing down your skills. And as you've been going through the brainstorming about your experience and your leadership and activities and, doing that deep introspection, you should already have come up with some skills, right? So take this section to really narrow in on what are some of those skills, like computer software, languages, certifications. And what's important to point out here is that these are hard skills, right? This is where you have proven experience, say like Photoshop, okay, or Stata. These are not soft skills like hard working. For the soft skills, you want to be able to blend those into the bullets in the experience section of your resume so that it becomes clear to your reader that you've got these the soft skills. Now, you can also add an interest section. So just write out, some of the things that are interesting to you, like maybe world travel or gourmet cooking. In the Sienna example resume that we have, she has ukulele. So just think, an interest, when you have just a couple of interests, that can be a really great conversation starter in a resume. So you've done the brainstorming. You've done that initial preparatory work. And I want to encourage you to really have fun with that. Put some time aside, come with some blank sheets of paper or that computer document, right? And to do that introspection on the brainstorming. So what's next? So we're going back to those resume basics. Remember, the header, education, experience, and skills, right? What you want to do next is you want to actually start formatting your skills formatting your resume on a computer document. And you can use an existing template or you can start literally from scratch. And you want to start filling it in with information. So you start with preparing these sections in order to start building your resume. And you're going to need to reference those brainstorming worksheets that you've been working on. Now, this is the hardest part of writing a resume, because remember, we've got limited space. So give yourself plenty of time and know that you might have multiple drafts before you get to a good solid resume that you're really happy with. So what I want to do right now is let's jump back to our resume example. And of course, you can access this on the Wellesley Career Education website in the resume guidelines section. So we've talked about the formatting, right? Remember, we've got those 4 sections. And now let's just look a little bit at the content, okay? So in education here, we've got Wellesley College, we've got the expected graduation date over on the right, in order to balance it out with the correct dates. And then under Wellesley College, we've got the degrees, the Bachelor of Arts, major and minor, GPA. And here we've got MIT listed because she's a cross-registered student at MIT. And you'll see that it's a sub-bullet under Wellesley because being at MIT is part of her Wellesley education. She's not getting a separate degree at MIT. Now, in the leadership section, in the experience section, I want you to note here that we've got these bullets. We're using this bullet format, and that's what we're going to talk about next. This is where we populate each of these experiences with information about what you did, what you accomplished. So for example, let's take an example here. Let's look at this final bullet. Manage organization's social media presence, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter platforms. Increase Facebook engagement by 700%. So this information gives us great context, but it also shows us results, right? So this is an example of where you're quantifying something. So what we recommend also is from 2 to 5 bullets. And you want to be succinct and start with a strong action verb. So let's go back now to our presentation. And what we're going to talk about next is how do you write those effective bullets, right? So the bullets provide context and content. In other words, this is to help your reader. Remember, we've got to think in terms of the reader. We want the reader to understand what we're bringing. So this is to help the reader understand who you are and to build a picture of you. And we encourage you to think of bullets as accomplishment statements, okay? So remember, accomplishments. We did this in the brainstorming. Accomplishments, impact, contributions, results, problems you helped solve. Anything that you can quantify is helpful. Now, writing effective bullet points requires you to ask questions. So for each of your experiences, ask yourself questions like, what did you actually accomplish? Why and how did you complete a task? What was your unique contribution? What sets you apart from others? And you've already been doing this work during the brainstorming process. So now we're going to be more succinct and focused about it and create clear descriptions in bullet point formats. So I want to show you an approach that you can follow to help you write effective bullets in that accomplishment format. So for each bullet, okay, so for each bullet point, you want to start with an action verb, and it should be a strong action verb. And we have a list of action verbs in that navigating the job search under resume guidelines in that section. And you should go visit that list because it is just a treasure house of action verbs. Next, you want to focus on what you did. So a very brief statement, right? It's a 1 or 2 lines as a bullet of the task, the duty, or responsibility. And anytime you can quantify it, it helps enormously. But this isn't the most important part of your bullet point. What's most important is this third part, where you go beyond telling what you did and describe how and why you did it, when and how often. You want to really give some more depth and texture here and substance, right? So this is more than just explaining what your tasks were, right? It is just giving much more substance. So what did you accomplish? What was the result or outcome of your work? What was the impact? And this is what really distinguishes a good resume bullet from one that really makes a resume competitive. So I want to take a moment and give you a couple of examples. We have a section in the career education website under resume resources called How to Write Effective Bullets. And I encourage you to go through that whole article, but what you see here on the screen are just a couple of examples. So the examples on the left are kind of the before version, and the ones on the right are the after version. And as I read through the first two examples, I want you to really listen to how much more information is packed into the after version. So let's start with provide after-school tutoring support. So that's a little bit vague and general. What's a much better approach is to say tutored approximately 10 students in chemistry and biology on a weekly basis while constantly assessing each student's needs in order to structure and scaffold instruction appropriately. Do you see how that just gives so much more context? Okay, let's take a second example. Answer phone calls at crisis hotline. So that's pretty general bullet right there, and we're going to give it more depth and context by telling giving much more description about what you actually did. So provide weekly crisis counseling to sexual assault survivors to give them immediate emotional support and refer them to appropriate counseling, legal, and medical advocacy services. So I encourage you to take some time and go through these examples in order to get a little bit of practice on how to write more effective bullets. Okay, so we're going back to our presentation now, and we have an entire 2 pages of lists. I'm not going to jump into them here, but I encourage you to visit those lists of action verbs. And the action verbs that we have on the website fall into these different categories. So depending on what your areas are that you want to focus on for your resume, you can find action verbs in these different areas. And these are in the Navigating Your Job Search section, Resume Guidelines on Wellesley's Career Education website. It's a really great resource. Now, I do want to take a minute and show you a checklist. This is also on our website that you will want to access as you put your resume together. And it's in the Resume Guidelines section. So that was that same section. And I know if this is the first time you're seeing this, it might be a little bit confusing, but this is under Resources on Wellesley's Career Education website. And you go into the Navigating Your Job Search. Then there's a section called Resume Guidelines and Samples. And as you scroll down on the left menu, there's a resume checklist. And I'm not going to go through every item here, but as you put your resume together, I encourage you to go through this checklist. And this is something that you can also review with either your mentor or your community career advisor. So back to our presentation, and we're coming to the end now. So I want to just talk a little bit about, well, in a few minutes, this webinar will be over, and what do you do next? So now that you've participated, you've picked up this information, what are your next steps? So we encourage you to sit down and do the brainstorming exercise to complete it. It might take a little bit of time. It will require a good amount of introspection, but what it helps you with is to get things out of your head and onto paper or onto a computer document, right? So that you can start to organize it. Then the next step, and this is the most time-consuming step, because with the brainstorming exercise, you don't have to worry about correct punctuation and things like that. You're just kind of doing this dump of information, right? But with creating a draft, you do have to be thoughtful about fitting as much as you can in a thoughtful way into this limited territory that we have that's called a one-page resume. And you start by looking at those 4 sections, right? Remember the header, which is your name and your contact info, education, experience, and skills. Those 4 key sections is where you start. We want to encourage you to attend an upcoming resume workshop too, taking your resume to the next level. So once you've created that first one-page resume, you are more than welcome to come to the next workshop, and we encourage you to do so. You'll have to check Handshake to see upcoming dates. I believe we have one in fall of 2018 on September 11th. It'll be on campus. You may also want to schedule an appointment with your mentor or your career community advisor in Handshake. And this is really valuable because they have lots of experience with resumes. And if you're looking at a specific industry, they can also give you specific insights for resume preparation for those industries. And then lastly, we encourage you to review our career education website resources page. Under the title Navigating the Job Search, you'll find some of the information that I referenced today. So for example, the resume guidelines, the sample resumes, those list of action verbs, the checklists, and other information. It's all there on Wellesley's career education website. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. I'm Stephanie Hessler, a career community advisor here at Wellesley Career Education. And on behalf of my colleagues at Career Education at Wellesley, I want to thank you so much for investing your time in this most important process of learning how to build your resume. And to remind you that it's a wonderful place to be at the early stages of building your resume. And we want to wish you all the very best and be in touch with us to get support on the journey. Thank you so much for participating. Bye-bye.